Behavioral Neuroscience, Chapter 10, Segment 3. The spatial frequency filter model is a model of pattern analysis that emphasizes Fourier analysis of visual stimuli. Using Fourier analysis, we can determine which combination of sine waves would be needed to make any particular complex waveform. Any series of dark and light stripes can be analyzed into the sum of a visual sine wave and its harmonics. A spatial frequency can exist at any level of contrast. Low frequencies correspond with large uniform areas, and high frequencies correspond with small details and sharp contrast. The suggestion of multiple spatial frequency channels led to entirely different conceptions about how the visual system deals with spatial stimuli. The spatial frequency approach is useful in many aspects of pattern recognition. Neurons in V1 also appear to be involved in forming mental images. Extrastriate areas receive input from V1, and some receive direct input from the LGN. Receptive fields of the cells in extrastriate areas seem to be more complex than those in V1. Investigations with macaque monkeys reveal at least 32 cortical areas that are directly involved with visual function. Areas that are largely or entirely visual in function occupy 30% of the human cortex and about 55% of the macaque cortex. Area V2 is adjacent to V1, and many of its cells respond to textures in naturalistic scenes. V2 cells can also respond to illusory contours. Area V4 responds to sinusoidal frequency gratings, concentric and radial stimuli, and wavelength differences. Area V5, the medial temporal area, is specialized for the perception of motion. V1 has separate representations for at least 4 dimensions of the visual stimulus. Number 1. Location in the visual field, with larger, finer mapping of the central region of the visual field than of the periphery. 2. Ocular dominance. 3. Orientation. 4. Color. Ocular dominance columns are regions of the cortex in which one eye or the other provides a greater degree of synaptic input. All cells in the vertical column of cells have the same ocular dominance. Ocular dominance slab is a slab of visual cortex about 0.5 millimeters wide in which the neurons of all layers respond preferentially to stimulation of one eye. Ocular dominance is especially clear in layer Roman numeral 4, where each cell is monocular, responding to only one eye. Above and below this layer, most cells respond to stimulation of both eyes, but still prefer one eye over the other. Most infants become captivated by stereograms, pairs of pictures showing somewhat different left eye and right eye views at about 3 or 4 months. It is presumed that the cortex is unable to separate information from the two eyes at this age because the information reaches the same cortical neurons. An orientation column is a column of visual cortex that responds to rod-shaped stimuli of a particular orientation, organized parallel to the surface of the cortex. Adjacent orientation columns shift by 90 degrees, creating regularly spaced pinwheels in which responses to different stimulus orientations pivot around a center. 4 stages of color perception are: the cones receive visual information, the information is processed by neurons in the local circuits of the retina leading to ganglion cells. The ganglion cells send the wavelength information to the LGN, and then the information goes to V1, where it is relayed to other visual cortical areas. A hue is a dimension of light perception, varying around the color circle through blue, green, yellow, orange, and red. People with color blindness can often distinguish some hues. This is more common in males than females. The hue perceived at a particular point is strongly affected by the pattern of wavelengths and intensities in other parts of the visual field. The trichromatic hypothesis is a hypothesis of color perception stating that there are 3 types of cones, each excited by a different region of the spectrum, and each having a separate pathway to the brain. This is proposed by Helmholtz. He proposed that blue-sensitive, green-sensitive, and red-sensitive receptors would be found that would be sharply tuned to its part of the spectrum and have a separate path to the brain. Herring later proposed that there are 4 unique hues and 3 opposed pairs of colors: blue, yellow, green, red, and black, white. The opponent process hypothesis is the theory that color vision depends on systems that produce opposite responses to light of different wavelengths. 2 of the 3 retinal cone pigments show some response to almost any wavelength. The pigments have different peaks of sensitivity. The nervous system detects differences between cones to extract color information. Certain ganglion cells and certain cells at higher stations in the visual system are color specific, even though the receptor cells are not. Cones have names depending on their peak areas of wavelength sensitivity: short, medium, and long. There are far fewer short receptors than the other two, and this explains why acuity is much lower with short wavelength illumination.